Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 187. The Bulls are back in town. The Medici return.
E così ritorno su, lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
In this episode, we're finally going to go back and talk about our good friends, the Medici. Remember that if you want to know more about the Medici, there is the Medici podcast by Chad Denton. Go over and have a listen wherever you get your podcasts. When we spoke of the Italian wars, we touched upon the Battle of Garigliano, the one in which the Spanish defeated the French, putting yet another nail in the coffin of the French presence in southern Italy. Many men died in that battle, some in the actual fighting, some as they tried to escape the rout and drowned in the swollen waters of the Garigliano River. Among these was an ally of the French, one Piero de Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, whom I believe we last saw being exiled from Florence after panicking during the descent of Charles VIII in 1494 and giving up a series of Florentine fortresses without the consent of the Florentine Council. Piero would spend the rest of his life trying to get back into Florence. One attempt was to fight alongside Cesare Borgia, hoping to then take advantage of the favor of Cesare's daddy, Pope Alexander VI, as well as that of their ally, the new King of France, Louis XII. It didn't pay off. When the Pope and King settled with Florence, they left any mention of the Medici being allowed back in completely out of the picture. When Cesare Borgia discovered the conspiracy against him and the conspirators were killed, including some members of the Orsini family related to the Medici, the way was definitively blocked towards that path for a Medici return. Meanwhile, in Florence, no one was really missing the Medici, although things were not all sunshine and unicorn. After the fall of Girolamo Savonarola, the government of Florence existed in a sort of balanced stalemate. The two main groups of interest were the Ottimati, the traditional elite of the nobles and traditional banking and merchant families, and the Popolari, the so-called popular party, who were more the new rich than actually working class. On paper, control was in the hands of the Popolari, but the Ottimati managed to block their attempts to not only pass a property tax to raise badly needed funds, but even organize a census to have a base for those taxes. After the turbulent period of the first phase of the Italian wars, Florence, one of the richest powers in the Western world, was going broke. By 1502, it seemed like the old solutions were no longer sufficient, and the ruling council of the Republic went in a direction that was counter to the ancient love and even obsession for, at least superficial, democratic freedoms. They elected a Gonfaloniere for life. The man chosen was a character we have already met, Piero Soderini, he who had stood up to King Charles after Piero de Medici had folded and Soderini had managed to make a better deal for the Republic. He actually did a decent job. His family had come to prominence in the early 1300s after the decline of the Cerchi and Donati, so even before the Medici. This should have placed him in the Ottimati faction, but he actually acted in favor of the lower classes. He put a cap on wedding dowries, and a marriage would no longer mean getting into deep debt. He made credit more accessible to the middle classes and blocked attempts to disband the council. All in all, he did a pretty decent job and managed to get Florence through the following decade. He even saw a moment of great national pride in 1509 when Florence regained control of poor little Pisa, who had so bravely held on to its independence for almost 15 years. Soderini stayed in power until 1512. Then something happened. But we started off with Piero de Medici dying in the Garigliano River in 1503. His body was found, and he was not buried in Florence, but at the Abbey of Montecassino. Even in death, Piero de Medici, known as il fatuo, something like the ineffective or inconsequential, but also known as the unlucky, would never make it back to Florence. Why was he buried at Montecassino? Well, because it belonged to his brother, Giovanni the Cardinal. Among all the political and diplomatic moves that his father Lorenzo de Medici had made, having his son made a cardinal was, in the eyes of the Magnificent himself, his greatest move. Seeing how things worked out, both for Giovanni and for the continuation of the dynasty, he might have been right. Giovanni the Little Tyke was tonsured at the ripe old age of 8. The tonsure was the characteristic shaving of the top of the head that characterizes monks. I went into a bit of a rabbit hole about the tonsure, and it seems that it is a symbol of humility. I'm not quite sure what the logical connection is. Why does having the top of your head shaved so that you're being humble? But I suppose with that sort of haircut, you can't really look cool and fancy, so that must be it. Also, in the 6th century, it was very stylish for the barbarians to have big, fluffy, round hairdos, so it was also kind of a reaction to that. At the same time, Giovanni's father and the rest of his family started addressing him as messere, sir, and using the formal second-person plural, voi. But if this sounds like it's heading for a sad story of sacrifice and austerity and a barren childhood with no fun and games, the tonsure and the title was more or less for the moment the extent of it for little Johnny. He was allowed to stay with his family, play with his toys and brothers, but most of all, he was allowed to pursue his favorite pastime, eating. Although he was not known as a man to give in to all of the pleasures of the flesh, and for example, he was considered to be quite chaste, the guy loved to get his chops around some good grub. Later in his life, it would require 2 servants to help him get out of bed. At a very young age, he proved to be the brightest of the Medici brothers and would share his father's love for classic literature, managing to get back all of the books that had been taken from the family library at the time of their exile and creating a new library at the Medici Palace in Rome. He also added a great love for music, and he himself was apparently a good singer. We saw that he was made a cardinal at the mature age of 13, thanks to his father's diplomatic work with Pope Innocent VIII. To avoid a scandal, the news was not given until 3 years later. At the elderly age of 17, Giovanni participated in his first conclave. He initially backed Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, but when things started going clearly in favor of Rodrigo Borgia, Giovanni decided to switch sides, displeasing the Della Rovere faction, who saw him as a traitor, but also the Borgia faction, who saw him as an opportunist. For Giovanni, Rome was not the safest place to stay for now. As we say in Italian, tirava una brutta aria. A bad wind was blowing. So he got out of town, and that was the first of his 2 exiles. The second came 2 years later, in 1494, when his family was exiled from Florence. Piero headed for Venice, while Giovanni and their other brother Giuliano, as well as their cousin Giulio, son of the Giuliano, brother of the Magnificent, who had been killed in the Pazzi conspiracy. Don't worry if you get confused. Let's concentrate on Giovanni for the moment. One of the most worrying parts of the trip was when they ended up in Germany. There they were arrested, but then Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian treated them with great regard to make up for their erroneous arrest. By 1500, Pope Alexander VI was getting a bit annoyed with the Florentine authorities, which meant that Giovanni and the Medici could get back into his good books, and Giovanni returned to Rome and took up residence in one of the Medici palaces there. You can still see the building today. It is Palazzo Madama, the seat of the Italian Senate. It's not the most impressive building in the city, but it's just in front of Piazza Navona, so you can pop round to have a look. There is also another Medici palace in the beautiful Villa Borghese garden. the plight of the Medici improved even more with the election of Giuliano della Rovere, an old ally of the family who was willing to forget Giovanni's youthful side-switching. The new pope made Giovanni governor of Perugia and then papal legate to Bologna. So, with things looking up, the Medici bided their time. The opportunity came after the War of the League of Cambrai, as we saw. In 1512, Cardinal Giovanni de Medici leaned on the Pope to force the Florentine authorities to depose the Gonfaloniere Piero Soderini and allow the Medici back into Florence. The Florentines refused and soon enough found a large Spanish army, then allied with the Pope, in Florentine territory. Upon the arrival of the army, many citizens of the Mugello, the town of origin of the Medici, poured into Florence, where the citizens started to worry. On August 29, 1512, the Spanish army turned its artillery on the Florentine town of Prato, and soon enough a breach was made in the walls, and the attackers swarmed in. What followed was a cruel, barbaric massacre, an orgy of killing, raping, and looting by the drunken soldiers that left thousands of bodies in the streets of Prato. When news of the sack reached Florence, there was turmoil. The people panicked and did not know who to turn to. In the commotion, an old survival instinct finally kicked in, and cries of "The Bulls! The Bulls!" the emblem of the Medici, could be heard. On the 1st of September 1512, after 18 years in exile, the Medici returned to Florence. Cardinal Giovanni, his brother Giuliano, their cousin Giulio, and their nephew, son of the dead Piero, Lorenzo. They returned with no desire for revenge, and at first kept a low profile, showing that they had no intention to meddle with the ancient democratic organization. Giuliano, who had taken to wearing a beard which was stylish at the time for soldiers and nobles, shaved it in the Florentine democratic style and gave up his princely clothes for more simple attire. When it seemed that things couldn't get any better for the Medici boys, on the 11th of March 1513, big news arrived in Florence. Lorenzo the Magnificent's long-term plan had come to fruition. Local boy Giovanni, who was made cardinal at 13, became Pope Leo X at the age of 37, probably repeating something like, "I'm not old, I'm 37. When the Florentines got the news, they went nuts and had a wild party that got totally out of control. Fireworks and bonfires raged throughout the city, and people started dismantling and burning roofs until the city authorities were forced to pass a directive telling people not to dismantle and burn roofs. Barrels of wine were set out for people to come along freely to dip in their cup, and the members of the Medici family threw coins out of the windows until the sacks were empty, and then they threw out the sacks. Quietly, in the old, sneaky Medici way, Lorenzo, son of Piero, son of Lorenzo, son of Piero, son of Cosimo, was put in a position of power, flanked by the guidance of Giulio, who was made Archbishop of Florence, and a cardinal for good measure. And you know, of course, what job you can apply for once you are a cardinal. Giuliano instead stayed in Rome with his brother, Pope Leo, and was made general captain of the church. The Medici emblem of the red, round, whatever they were, and the blue one with the French lily could once again be displayed with pride. The Bulls were back in town. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the sketch after the credits. A History of Italy podcast is a Sentire Media production, created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and produced by my wonderful Patreon supporters, whom I'd like to thank, starting with the first part of the Galileo Galilei and Margherita Hack level, and they are Alison H., Amanda D., Annie, Benjamin W., Carsten, Catherine C., C. Lane, Cindy M., Chris H., Cospia Fanboy, David M., Dean V., Demetrio M., Dennis K., Dennis S., Dominique T., Edward J., Emily B., Eric W., Federica R., Gabriel S., Gunnar, Heather, Ignazio, Il Valentino, JT, and Jeff. And of course, we cannot ever forget the tippy-top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level Lisa K., Peter M., David L., David C., Sen, David A., Karen D., Helenka, Bridget, Dallas, Joseph V., Stephen, and Julian, and welcome aboard, and to the family, to Nonna, who, I assume, since nonna means grandma in Italian, is a grandma or really loves her or his grandma, or like my good friend Pietro, has been old ever since he was 20, and we always used to call him nonno. If, like those lovely Patreon supporters, you'd like to have access to ad-free episodes and extra content, you can do so by going to ahistoryofitaly.com website, going to the support page and clicking through to the Patreon page. Otherwise, you can make a one-off donation on PayPal. Thank you very much if you do. In general, we love corresponding with you, our constant listener, so if you do want to get in touch, please feel free to do so. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com or on social media, Instagram and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. Giovanni, where art thou? Giovanni!
Yes, Daddy.
I said, where art thou?
What?
Where are you?
First of all, I'm standing right here. And secondly, why are you talking so weird?
Well, I perceive that we now must utilize with thy holy self the idiom befitting a great prince of the Holy Mother Church.
Eh?
It's time we spoke to you as if you were a cardinal.
Ah, okay. You do you, Dad. What's up?
Hast thou performed the offices of thy sacred role on this fine morrow?
Am I gonna have to get translated or something?
Have you done your chores today?
Well, some of them.
Hast thou cleansed the extremities of the less endowed in the ways of wealth?
I'm gonna walk away soon.
Have you washed the feet of the poor?
Yes, I did this morning, and it was the most disgusting thing. One guy thought it was a complete service and wanted me to do his armpits.
Ah, yes, good. Hast thou blessed the Holy Host?
Well, I dropped some water on a plate of cookies.
Ah, splendid. I see a great future for you, my son. Perhaps one day your holy presence will grace the Cathedra of St. Peter.
Say what now?
Maybe one day you'll sit in the Pope's chair.
Ah, okay. I think I'm getting it now. Whatsoever may cause successful navigation of thy vessel, my first level life giver.
Huh?
Whatever floats your boat, Dad.
Ah, good.
So, can I back to playing hide and seek?
Well, yes. Have you not found them yet?
Well, Giuliano's usually pretty good and hard to find. Piero's the one over there with the bucket on his head.
Ah, my boys.
Okay, then. I'll get back to it, shall I?
Yes. You must enjoy it while you can. How beautiful youth is that so escapes
Dad.
us. Yes?
No poetry.
Not even a little one.
No. Now I'm off to play.
Okay, just have them confess and absolve them from their sins when you find them.
That could take a while. I need some extra dessert afterwards.
Ah, that's my spirit. I like a healthy appetite. You can have an extra dessert if you promise to set out an outline for church reform before bedtime.
What mahogany?